was built once, for one person, and the moment it was finished, Bugatti refused to say who owned it. Some legends aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be felt. The name translates simply, the black car, and that alone tells you everything. In the 1930s, Bugatti built something almost impossibly beautiful, the Type 57 SC Atlantic. Only a handful were ever made. One disappeared during World War II, smuggled onto a train fleeing the Nazi advance. It was never seen again. La Voiture Noire is not a remake of that car. It doesn't try to be. It's a requiem for it. Long, dark, carved from shadow, this machine was designed as a tribute to something lost. Every line is deliberate. Every surface tells a story that never had an ending. Bugatti built exactly one, and then they handed the keys to a single buyer whose name they refused to confirm. Many believe it was Ferdinand Piëch, the man who helped turn the Volkswagen Group into an automotive empire. The original Atlantic it honors may be worth over $100 million if it were ever found today. And the La Voiture Noire was sold for $18.7 million. Before Ferrari ruled Italy, before Lamborghini was even a thought, one car carved its name into European racing with nothing but speed, beauty, and pure danger. The late 1930s. European motorsport was raw, brutal. The roads had no barriers, the cars had no mercy, and drivers who raced them knew exactly what they were risking. Only 12 of these cars were ever created, each one hand-built, each one slightly different, and each one sent to the front lines of the most unforgiving races on the continent. This wasn't just Alfa Romeo's fastest car, it was Alfa Romeo's identity, the car that proved Italy could build something that was simultaneously a weapon and a work of art. The car that made Ferrari pay attention before he ever started his own company. To own one today isn't just to own a rare machine, it's to hold the very foundation of Italian motorsport in your hands. In 1939, when most production cars were struggling to reach 50 miles per hour, this car had a top speed of 110. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it was from a different era entirely. And this beauty was sold for $19.8 million. Jaguar didn't design this car in a studio, they designed it on a racetrack, in blood, in oil, and in the obsessive pursuit of one thing, winning Le Mans. Most cars are designed to be beautiful, some are designed to be fast. The D-Type was designed to win, and everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for victory was stripped away. Its shape was revolutionary for its era, a long, aerodynamic body that cut through air like nothing the racing world had ever seen. Magnesium and aluminum construction kept it light, and its monocoque structure introduced ideas that race car engineers would still be borrowing decades later. It dominated Le Mans. Not just once, it defined the circuit for a generation. Only a limited number of D-Types were ever built. Even fewer survived. The ones that did carry an almost supernatural history, machines that went to war on the world's greatest circuit and came back to tell the story. The D-Type's aerodynamic fin behind the driver's head wasn't just for looks. It was a stabilizer, designed to keep the car from lifting off the ground at speeds that shouldn't have been possible on open road circuits. And it sold for $21.78 million. America in the 1930s had movie stars, gangsters, and a depression that crushed millions. And then there was this, two cars built for men who didn't live by anyone else's rules. Only two SSJs were ever built. Two, in the entire history of the automobile. One went to Gary Cooper, the other to Clark Gable. The two biggest stars in Hollywood, men who didn't buy things because they were expensive, they bought things because nothing else was worthy of them. The Duesenberg SSJ wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. With a supercharged engine producing power that seemed almost fictional for the era, it was the loudest declaration of status America had ever put on four wheels. This wasn't European elegance. This was American dominance. Raw, unapologetic, built for men who made the rules because no one else dared to. When this car crossed the auction block, it didn't just sell, it transcended. The SSJ was so overpowered that Duesenberg's own engineers reportedly struggled to believe the numbers. In an era of tame, conservative engineering, they essentially built a supercar 60 years before the word existed, and the car was sold for $22 million. There are brands that race, and there are brands that win, and then there are moments, single, unrepeatable moments, that define a mark forever. For Aston Martin, it happened once, and it happened in this car. The year was 1959, Le Mans, the greatest endurance race on Earth. Aston Martin had been chasing the dream for years, a British brand fighting against the might of Ferrari, Mercedes, and Jaguar. And in 1959, they did something that has never happened again in their entire history. They won outright, not just their class. Overall, the best car in the world that day wore British racing green. This car, chassis number 1, the very first DBR1 ever built, is the origin of that legacy. It was driven by legends, it bled for that victory, and it carried Aston Martin from contender to immortal. Aston Martin has never won Le Mans outright since 1959. Over 60 years have passed. The DBR1 didn't just win a race, it won the only race in Aston Martin's history. That will never stop mattering. And this history changer was sold for $22.55 million. Ferrari doesn't make cars like this anymore, because the world that made it possible no longer exists. This one was commissioned once, for a cause greater than ownership, and then it disappeared into the hands of someone who asked never to be named. Ferrari's tailor-made program exists for one purpose: to build something that has never existed before and will never exist again. This Daytona SP3 is exactly that. Its design reaches back to Ferrari's golden era of endurance racing, the late 1960s, when Maranello's cars ruled the circuits of the world with a combination of savagery and beauty that still stops breath today. But this particular car carries something the others don't. It was sold for charity. The anonymity of its buyer wasn't discretion, it was generosity. Whoever holds the keys to this machine chose to let the car's story be about something bigger than them. That almost never happens. The Daytona SP3's name is a direct tribute to Ferrari's legendary 1-2-3 finish at the 1967 Daytona 24 Hours, a race where Ferrari crushed Ford on Ford's home soil, in America, in front of America. Revenge served at 200 miles per hour, and this masterpiece was sold for $26 million. 1,000 miles, public roads, no runoff areas, no safety nets, just drivers, machines, and the thin line between glory and catastrophe. One man drove this car into that 1,000-mile nightmare, and his name was already legend before he sat down. The Mille Miglia wasn't a race. It was a dare. Open Italian roads from Brescia to Rome and back, 1,000 miles at full speed, through towns, over mountains, past crowds standing just feet from cars traveling at over 150 miles per hour. Juan Manuel Fangio, the man many still consider the greatest driver who ever lived, slid into this Ferrari and drove it there. Only a handful of 290 MMs were ever built. Each was built for one purpose: to win the Mille Miglia, the most demanding race of the era. This car didn't just participate, it competed at the very tip of the spear. Fangio's hands touched this wheel, his foot pressed this accelerator, and this machine survived. In that era, survival was not guaranteed. The Mille Miglia was eventually banned in 1957 after a crash killed the driver, his co-driver, and 9 spectators, including 5 children. The race was simply too dangerous for any world to accept. This car raced in the final brutal years before that moment. The car Fangio drove into 1,000 miles of madness sold for $28.05 million. After the war, there was silence, and then Mercedes returned. Not quietly, not humbly, but with a machine so precise, so dominant, that the rest of the world simply stopped arguing. Germany was in ruins, its industry was rebuilding from nothing, and in 1954, Mercedes-Benz walked back onto the Grand Prix stage and won, not occasionally, relentlessly. The W196R rewrote what a racing car could be: desmodromic valve technology, fuel injection, a space frame chassis, ideas so advanced that rival engineers could barely understand them, let alone copy them in time. And at the wheel, Fangio again, the greatest driver alive, in arguably the greatest car of his era. This specific car achieved multiple Grand Prix victories. When it crossed the auction block, it became, at that moment, the most expensive car ever sold at public auction. Mercedes didn't return to racing to compete. They returned to remind everyone who the standard setter was. Mercedes withdrew from racing entirely in 1955, after one of the deadliest crashes in motorsport history at Le Mans killed over 80 spectators. The W196R never raced again in factory colors. Its legend was complete and sealed by tragedy. The car that announced Mercedes had returned. It sold for $29.6 million. Ferrari didn't build this car for its official factory drivers. They built it for independence. A machine engineered to stay in the shadows that ended up doing something no one planned, saving Ferrari's entire legacy. There are cars that earn their value by winning for the factory, and there are cars that earn it by fighting in the privateer trenches. The Ferrari 412P was a weapon delivered to elite independent teams. Maranello gave them slightly less power so their official cars could shine. But this specific machine, chassis 0854, refused to stay in the shadows. It went straight to war in the 1967 World Championship. It bled on the tarmac of Le Mans, survived the curves of Brands Hatch, and claimed a legendary third-place podium at the brutal 1,000 kilometers of Spa. Those independent points didn't just turn heads, they secured Ferrari's ultimate championship crown against Ford. Ferrari built this car alongside the legendary 330P4, the machine that humiliated Ford at Le Mans in 1967. The 412P shares its bloodline with one of the most celebrated racing cars in history, and after surviving those brutal tracks, it underwent a painstaking 9-year restoration to become the ultimate garage holy grail. And it sold for $30.25 million. Racing in the 1950s was beautiful, and racing in the 1950s was deadly. This Ferrari lived in both worlds simultaneously, winning some of the greatest races of the era and bearing witness to some of its darkest moments. Scaglietti built the body, Ferrari built the soul. Together, they created something that was almost too fast for the roads it was asked to race on. This car competed in the brutal endurance events of the late 1950s, events where speed and beauty coexisted with grief. The era when the world still hadn't decided how much it was willing to sacrifice for the spectacle of racing. Driven by some of the most celebrated names of the Golden Age, this Ferrari stood at the intersection of everything that made the sport irresistible, and everything that made it unbearable. Its history is not just about victories, it is about the price of speed, and that price gives it a weight that no other Ferrari of its era fully shares. Alfonso de Portago, driving this exact car, caused the accident that ended the Mille Miglia forever. The carnage was so catastrophic that the Italian government charged Enzo Ferrari himself with mass manslaughter. The race was never held again. A Ferrari built for glory, remembered for tragedy, sold for $35.7 million. For nearly 60 years, no Ferrari repeated it. 60 years. The world changed. The cars changed. Drivers came and went, and still, no Ferrari ever crossed that finish line first again. 1965 Le Mans. Ferrari wins overall. It would be the last time for an entire generation. The 250 LM was a transitional car, Ferrari's first mid-engine racing machine, a bridge between the front-engine era and the future. Enzo Ferrari believed in it enough to fight for its homologation. The FIA refused, so Ferrari raced it as a prototype, with a privateer team carrying the flag. And they won the greatest race in the world. Nearly 6 decades would pass, with Ferrari challenging, competing, and falling short until they finally broke the curse in 2023. But for over half a century, the 250 LM's victory stood alone as the monument that closed Maranello's original golden age. Some records fall, some become monuments. Ferrari was so furious at the FIA's refusal to homologate the 250 LM that Enzo Ferrari withdrew his factory team from racing in protest. A privateer team had to carry the car to its greatest victory. Ferrari didn't even officially show up to claim the win that defined his legacy, and it sold for $36.3 million. Collectors don't buy this car to drive it. They buy it because it is the closest thing the automotive world has to owning a piece of history. Something that can't be reproduced, can't be replaced, and will never exist again. 36 were built, 36 across 3 years in Maranello, each one hand-finished, each one assigned to a driver, a team, a race. The 250 GTO dominated GT racing with 3 consecutive world championships. It didn't just win races, it defined what a road-legal racing car was supposed to be. But what makes the GTO truly unreachable is what happened after. Ferrari never made another like it. Those 36 cars scattered across the planet, slowly becoming the most coveted objects in automotive history. The true miracle of the 250 GTO is its survival rate. While most 1960s racing cars were destroyed, crashed, or scrapped, all 36 original GTO chassis built by Ferrari still exist intact today. It is a statistically impossible clean sheet that keeps its legacy perfectly unblemished. And it's sold for $48.4 million. The Hybrid. A car that looks exactly the same as the one you just saw, but is entirely different under the skin. Ferrari built only one of these mutants, a machine so dangerous and unique that the rulebooks didn't even have a name for it. This machine is a total anomaly. Ferrari took the beautiful body of a 250 GTO, ripped out its standard engine, and stuffed a massive 4-liter V12 prototype engine directly from their Le Mans program inside it. It is the only factory-owned GTO of its kind. It features a unique, aggressive bulge on the hood to fit the giant power plant and was raced directly by the official Scuderia Ferrari team. It didn't just straddle the line between a GT car and a prototype, it defied the rules entirely. Because this car is a hybrid mutant built by Enzo Ferrari himself, historians spent decades arguing over what its real name should be. It is so unique that it achieved a legendary class victory at the grueling 1,000 kilometers of Nürburgring. After sitting hidden in a private collection for nearly 40 years, it finally emerged into the daylight, and it sold at public auction for exactly $51.7 million. Speed has a shape. And in 1955, Mercedes found it. The standard W196 was already dominant, but the Stromlinienwagen, the streamliner, was something else entirely. Built specifically for the fastest circuits in the world, its fully enclosed bodywork was designed around one obsession: removing every last obstacle between the car and the wind. The wheel arches were sealed, the body was continuous. Every surface served aerodynamics over everything else. Fangio drove it, and the opposition watched it disappear. Only a handful of Stromlinienwagen examples were built. This is the most valuable of them all, a car that never existed to be collected, only to be fastest. And then, when Mercedes withdrew from racing after the tragedy of Le Mans 1955, it was locked away, preserved, perfect. This is a weapon that was never fully unsheathed. The Stromlinienwagen's enclosed bodywork had an unintended consequence. Drivers could not see their own front wheels. In tight corners, they were navigating blind. Fangio reportedly said he could feel the car's limits better than he could see them. He drove beyond sight, and he still won. And it sold for $53.9 million. Two were built. One went to a museum. The other was driven every single day, on public roads, in traffic, past pedestrians who had no idea what was beside them. And then, one day, it was sold. In secret. For a number that changed everything. Rudolf Uhlenhaut was the chief engineer behind Mercedes' greatest racing machines, a man of extraordinary genius who was, by many accounts, as fast as the professional drivers he built cars for. When Mercedes withdrew from racing in 1955, two of these cars were built as closed-roof successors to the open 300 SLR racers. They never competed. The season was over. The program was finished. Uhlenhaut kept one for himself, and he drove it to work, on weekends, through the streets of Stuttgart like any other commuter, except that no other commuter in history has ever driven anything like this. For nearly 7 decades, these cars sat in the Mercedes Museum, never offered, never discussed, considered unsellable by the company that built them. And then, in 2022, Mercedes made a quiet phone call. A private auction, a single buyer, and a price that the automotive world will spend decades processing. This is not a car with a value. This is a car that sets the value of all other cars. Uhlenhaut's driving ability was so well documented that Mercedes engineers used his lap times to benchmark their own professional drivers. He wasn't just the man who built the fastest cars of his era. He was, unofficially, one of the fastest drivers of his era. He just chose to build rather than race. The most expensive car ever sold, $143 million. $142 million, a sum that defies all logic. But beyond the staggering price tags, what we've witnessed today is the raw, unbridled history of human ambition pushed to its absolute limit. Which of these legends truly stands above the rest? Tell me your choice in the comments.